Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 44, the Henry Aaron episode of the show. We're happy to be here to talk the first-year players draft. But before I get to that, remind everybody that the ABL is a 30-team league dynasty league with 20 minor league spots per team for a glorious 600 prospects. So we talk all things prospecting, but particularly prospecting in the ABL. And today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the first-year player draft for 2026. I'm actually involved in a live draft right now, and it's my turn on the clock, so I'll be making my pick live as pick number 12 overall in the first round in just a minute. But this year's first-year player draft for the ABL, since it's 30 teams, I'm going to cover the top 30 prospects in the league. I'm going to do it by groups. So we'll be talking about the top 14 as a group, the next 6, and the back 10. Just as a housekeeping matter, the ABL does not allow international players in the first-year player draft outside of the J15 process. So the J15s are in, but the Japanese players and players coming over from Asia are not in the draft, so I'm not going to be including those players in the discussion. In any event, before I get to the full preview, I'm involved in a sister league of the ABL, which is called ACL. A 30-team league as well. 30-team league as well, also with 20 slots for the minors. And it's my turn on the clock right now, and my selection is going to be somebody I talked about on the last 2 episodes, the San Francisco Giants shortstop prospect from the J15 process, Luis Hernandez. And so I am picking him right now. And now the Rockford Peaches are on the clock at 13 overall. But turning back to the ABL preview and the draft that's coming up very soon, we're having our live auction for the Major League rosters next week, followed shortly thereafter by the first-year player draft. So this will be hopefully entertaining and interesting for my fellow owners in the league. But let's hop into it and talk about some observations I have about this year's draft. And what I wanted to start off by just saying is this year's draft is somewhat unusual compared to the last couple of seasons in that we don't have a lot of top-end college players in this year's draft, which are often very popular picks early on because of their proximity to the major leagues. And instead, we have a real bevy of J15 players that are really highly rated and that I have in my top 15. Although other owners may be scared to draft J15s that early, as I covered in the first 2 podcasts of the year of the J15 process. Many owners are very wary about drafting them because they're so young, and there's a lot of development ahead of them, and there's not as much scouting eyes on them as you might get in the prep school process, for example, here in the United States. So people may be hesitant to draft J15s very high, as I just drafted Luis Hernandez number 12 overall in my other league. And a lot of the top players from the U.S. side of the ball are also prep players, which presents another kind of risk factor that a lot of owners are very reticent to take on with early draft picks. So this is a draft that has been criticized quite widely in fantasy baseball circles, or at least the ones that I follow, as being very weak. I kind of have a slightly different view on it, which is I think it's a strong draft if you're willing to draft young, but a rather unpalatable draft if you're looking for guys that college experience or that are closer to the majors, which is why I think you're seeing a lot of teams trade down in leagues in the first round or out of the top 10, not knowing what to do with the top pick overall, because of the uncertainty that the young players really create at that level, and not having an elite college player at that top part of the draft that you might feel really comfortable taking number 1 or number 2 overall. So with that lead in, I just wanted to talk about how I see the top of the draft, and I'm calling these guys the 14 nines. And that's a reference to the prospect handbook that I put out every year. Players in the nines are basically the highest grade players you can have. And these players on the screen, these 14 guys, are the 14 players from the first year player draft only. They got a grade of 9 or above in my prospect handbook. It's not the prospect handbook grading that will exist in 2026. I'm still in the process of finalizing that. And that'll be coming out shortly after the first year player draft. These are references to the model and the formulas I used last season. And one little side note about that, because I'm only grading the players in the actual first year player draft pool, they're rated relative to each other and not against the entire pool. So some of these players, while they have a 9 in this particular pool that I'm looking at, they might slip down into the 8s when compared to all the prospects that are owned in the ABL, which again is about 600 prospects. So let's talk about what all the colors mean on the slide, and why I'm highlighting players differently. The players in red are all J15s, and they're players I've covered in prior podcasts this year. I think very highly of them. I'm willing to take them very high. These are all guys that are in my top 14. I should also note that the list is not in my order, my draft order, for competitive purposes. These are just guys randomly organized on the page that are in my top 14. But this is my top 14 for the draft. The players in green are college players, and you can see what I was referencing earlier, that there are not a lot of college players at the top of the draft, at least in my estimation. And the players in blue are prep players, U.S. stateside players who are 18, maybe they just turned 19 years old. In some cases, they might even still be 17. So Eli Willits, for example, is not a J15, but he is 17 years old, so I colored him in red, the same as the J15 players who are either 16 or 17 years old. You'll also notice there are quite a few shortstops on this list. Those who follow the prospect handbook know that I weight players based on many categories of information, but including position, and shortstops and center fielders get the highest grades. And as I've explained in prior podcasts, that's because those players have a greater likelihood of being able to shift to another position if they can't prove themselves at the beginning position. So you'll often see, for example, shortstops become center fielders or second basemen, and center fielders can usually shift to a corner outfield pretty readily. And that's because these guys are premium athletes at the start. And there's just a greater likelihood that they're going to get more and more opportunities to get to the majors than, say, a player starting at right field or at first base. But I've covered that at length in other podcasts. I won't cover it again here. We'll probably revisit that when we get the prospect handbook announcement in a couple of weeks, which I'm looking forward to. But just a few observations about this group that's on the screen as well, and then I'll go through each one of them and kind of share some notes that I have on each player. One thing that is really apparent to me is that there's a very little gradation difference in my gradings for many of these players, meaning that you could take one at 3 and get just as good value, perhaps at 8 or 9, or get, pick 9 and get a guy there that you might get the same value at 14, which is another reason why I think a lot of teams should think about trading down. But if you're somebody like me who relishes the opportunity to take a high ceiling guy early in the round, I'm happy to stay where I am. In ABL, I've got 2 picks in the top 10. So I anticipate coming away with at least 2 of these players on the screen, which I'm excited about. But I highlighted in purple boxes 3 particular players: Ethan Holiday, Luis Hernandez, and Liam Doyle. And I highlighted them because the gradation difference I have between those players is really de minimis. Meaning that I have them basically all graded about the same. For different reasons, I have a preference for some more than others, but it's really a coin flip in my mind which one of those guys is going to end up being the best out of the 3. And it all highlights that there's a lot of uncertainty in any prospecting evaluation, and particularly at the top of the draft. So this is one of those drafts where I'm not looking to move up a lot or move around a lot in the draft, because I don't think I'm actually going to improve my position that much. In the top 14. So with those general notes, I'll launch into some kind of individual observations I have about these players, some of which are going to highlight, the uncertainty and the warts that each one of these players has as we enter the first-year player draft. I do think that there's a lot of risk in the top 14, and it's possible when we get to the next slide and talk about the next 6 players, in other words, 15 through 20, that some of those players will leapfrog the players on the screen and actually be better value, maybe more often than we have seen in prior years. In any case, let's start to talk about our discussion, with Jojo Parker, or Joseph Parker, as his legal name is given. This is a very interesting player. A lot of guys are high on. He just went in the top 5 in my ACL draft. Jojo's a 6'2" shortstop. Didn't play last year in terms of when he got drafted. No minor league stats, from last year. 18 years old. Very young. He's got good but not great tool grades for Baseball America: 55 hit, 55 power, 50 speed, but a 60 overall grade. and a high risk grade. Meaning that he's an 18-year-old prospect with a lot of ceiling, but right now doesn't have any really loud carrying tools. We're looking for some development and for him to grow into louder tools. So, for example, his 6'2", 195 frame is a pretty good frame for a hitter. And if he's able to put on a little bit more muscle, maybe the power comes in. One other thing I've read about in the scouting reports of him is that he's a line drive hitter. And while that can be great for batting average and doubles, you might want to see some more launch angle in him to reach his in-game power and drive the ball over the fence. So it'll be interesting to see how his swing develops or changes once he gets fully integrated into the minor leagues, and to see what Toronto does with him in that regard. So again, really solid prospect. I like JoJo Parker quite a bit. Do I think, for example, he's a top 5 pick? Probably not, in my estimation. But I can see why owners do like him a lot, and some very savvy prospectors that I know, and I've already seen draft him pretty high. But I've seen a wide range of where he's going in first-year player drafts. Sometime in the top 10 through 15 spot, and other times, as I just said, in the top 5. So JoJo Parker, a guy I like, but don't love. But I do see him in the top 14 overall this year. The next guy on the list is Eli Willits, another shortstop. This one in the Washington Nationals organization. 6'1", 175, which is a little slight in terms of the weight for the frame. So maybe he can put on a little muscle and build there, which might mean there might be some power projection coming for him, or some power upgrade in his grade overall. He's got a 55, 50, 60 grade, 60 for speed, 60 overall from Baseball America. But interestingly, only an average risk grade, which is really good for a 17-year-old prospect in this case, which suggests that Baseball America feels very strongly about this player's approach to the game, mental makeup, and his fundamental skill set that he has. So that's a really powerful endorsement, in my view, from Baseball America. Only had 50 at-bats last year at A-ball, so you kind of throw that out. Not a great sample size to really make anything out of. But the power is the big question here. For Willits, he's got below average exit velocity. Is his power going to come along? A lot of intangibles that you like to read about with this kid. He gets high marks for leadership abilities. His his approach to the game. His serious discipline and work ethic. So again, player that Baseball America likes a lot. I put a lot of stock in that. Does have a good speed grade. Can't teach speed. He's supposed to be a good in-game runner in terms of actually being able to reach that speed. So perhaps, a slightly more valuable prospect in a roto league that counts stolen bases as a category as opposed to a points league like ABL is. But the big question mark, again, is his power. Is it going to develop? I have Eli rated very highly on my board, but he does give me the willies in terms of, no pun intended, in terms of the power questions that come with him. And you really want, if you do draft him, you're really going to want to see both physical maturity coming and also him being able to reach his power in some way in games, and that exit velocity coming up, hopefully. The next guy on the list is Dax Kilby. Really high on Dax, like him a lot. This is a guy that I have rated higher than a lot of people do on my board. 6'2", 190, second baseman for the Yankees, 18 years old. He had a very limited 69 at-bat sample size at A-ball, but did notably walk a lot more than he struck out. He gets above average grades across the board, 60 hit, 55 power, 55 run, 60 overall, high risk grade, which is pretty normal, again, for an 18-year-old prospect. And he has really high marks for his in-game speed already. He's really a good base runner by all accounts. Does have a weak arm, so he's very likely to stick at second base. It shouldn't prohibit him from reaching the major leagues as an actual second baseman and the cornerstone, or the keystone, excuse me. But this is a guy you can get excited about because his 6'2", 190 frame suggests that that power may actually be real at 55 or even grow a little bit, maybe to a 60. But even if he ends up as a 55 grade, power hitter with that 60 hit tool, if it continues to develop and he continues to have a good walk to strikeout ratio, this is a guy who can add a lot of value at a position that is not often full with like offensive-minded hitters in this game. A lot of guys who play good defense, but or not power hitters. This is a guy who might be able to deliver a lot of walks, a lot of runs, stolen bases, good batting average, and also contribute with some power as well. And in a points league, I think he's really a dynamic player to keep an eye on, and the Yankees got a good one here. The next guy on the list is Ethan Holiday, who obviously comes from a very long bloodline of Major League Baseball players, including his father, who's like a borderline Hall of Famer. Ethan, is in Colorado like his dad was before him. 6'4", 210, huge kid, 18 years old. That's a really big frame for an 18-year-old. It'll be interesting to see how he grows into that body even more. Unsurprisingly, power is his calling card with that frame, a 65 power grade, but notably also a 45 hit tool grade and a 40 run grade. And I highlight that because, this guy is right now potentially a one-dimensional player. He could just be a great power hitter who maybe struggles to make contact. Really interested to see what happens with his hit tool and his walk to strikeout ratio as he progresses through the minors. He had a ton of Ks in his very limited 99 plate appearance debut. And, at high A, he did reach high A, which is nice, but very blah start to his minor league career. And like I said, he has amazing exit velocity, which is not surprising for his frame and his power grade. But you're really going to want to see the contact come along, because if he can't make contact and he can't advance bases because of his slow speed and get a lot of extra bases, and he can't steal any bases or score as many runs because he can't get around the base path as fast, he becomes a more limited fantasy baseball contributor. And this is a kid who is being drafted pretty high in a lot of leagues. And if you're drafting him in the top 5, there's a lot of risk in my view that carries with him. So again, yet another player who's got some exciting skill sets, but you don't feel really great about taking him in the top 5. But I do see that's where he's going in a lot of drafts. I understand that because of the power. It just comes with a lot of risks. I'm not going to talk again about the J15s because I've covered them at length in the prior podcast this season. You can tune in for those on YouTube if you want to see that. But I do like very much the players that are here: Luis Hernandez, Angel Gomez, Wandy Sejan, Jonathan Colomé, and Francisco Renteria. Really nice players. They have their own warts and pluses, as I've talked about, but I see them all, at least on my board, being in the top 14. And as I said, I just took Luis Hernandez at number 12 overall in the ACL draft. So obviously I like him quite a bit. I wanted to talk about the pitchers on the right. And this is an interesting group because we do have some college arms here. Cade Anderson, 6'2", 175, 20 years old, didn't pitch in his after the draft last year. He projects as a 2 or 3 in a rotation. He's got an interesting grading combination, some of which concerns me. He's got a 55 fastball grade, which is above average, 60, 55 for his main pitches. 55 is his control grade, which is good. 60 overall. But I really don't like to see a top pitcher in the draft with a 55 fastball grade. It concerns me because he's not going to be able to establish his fastball as readily as other pitchers that are available in this place. And if you're going to be really a truly elite pitcher in the major leagues, it is more often than not really important to have a dominating fastball. So I prefer, if I'm going to spend a really high pick on a fastball pitcher, or excuse me, on a pitcher, to have a fastball that's a 60 grade or above. Nothing wrong with the 55 grade. He's got some excellent off-speed pitches to go with it, breaking pitches. But the other thing I would note about him, his 6'2", 175 frame does present some concerns. The 6'2" height is fine, but the 175 is pretty slight, which raises questions about his durability as a starting pitcher in the major leagues. You want to see him put on some more weight and some more muscle, hopefully, as he gets a little bit older, but he is already 20. I don't know how much physical projection is left in that body compared to, for example, an 18-year-old. And he is coming off an elbow injury, or he has a prior elbow injury, I should say, which underscores the durability questions about Cade Anderson. Again, really nice prospect. He's in a good organization for pitching in Seattle. Do like him, but yet another player in this group that I'm a little queasy about taking with a really high pick this year. but he's certainly on my board. He's in the top 14 for me. But that's Cade. So let's talk about the St. Louis Cardinals. Liam Doyle, player is very exciting. 6'2", 220. Guy's built like a fullback. Really muscular kid for that height. 21 years old, so he's really close to the major leagues. There's even talk about him reaching major leagues in 2026 in the back end. We'll see if that happens, but certainly a guy who could be up in the majors the following year, whether that's 2027 or because of the work stoppage, 2028. But a guy projects at the top of the Cardinals rotation for many years to come, hopefully. He reached Double A, but only had not even a cup of coffee and an espresso shot at Double A. Huge fastball, 70 grade fastball by Baseball America, in sharp contrast, for example, to Cade Anderson. But after that, it's 55, 50, 50 control, 60 overall. So this is really a dominant fastball pitcher who relies very heavily on it. I think I read somewhere that he was throwing at 62% of the time at one point last year. Great fastball, but he also has some interesting warning signs on him too. High effort delivery is one thing I read about him, which is always something that concerns me with a guy who's leaning so heavily on a fastball and generating that much velocity, because it does create injury risks for a pitcher like Liam Doyle. And while he's a sturdy kid at 6'2", 220, if you're going to go max out all the time and have a delivery that puts a lot of strain on your body, elbow risk can follow, forearm injuries can follow, shoulder injuries can follow. So yes, Liam Doyle is a guy I really like. I'm excited the Cardinals drafted him. He's a guy who's at the top of my board. But yet another player who is not a surefire guy at the top, to the extent there is such a thing. And I see him being drafted in the top 5 routinely. So huge reward, but also huge risk with Doyle. Let's talk about Jamie Arnold, another player that is very popular at the top of boards this year. I really like him quite a bit. He's 21 years old, didn't pitch last year after his draft. But his grades, his scouting grades, remind me a lot of Ryan Sloan, the Seattle Mariners prospect who came up last year. 60, 60, 60 for his 3 pitches, which is exactly what Ryan Sloan had last year for his 3 pitches, top 3 pitches, and a 55 command control grade from Baseball America, which is something you really like to see. 60 overall, and average risk, which is something you also want to see for a college pitcher coming out from Baseball America. It's got notably great extension, is something that you read about, which is a little unusual for a 6'1" pitcher. Normally it's the much taller guys who have great extension just because of their frame. But his delivery allows him to get great extension, which causes some deception in his delivery, which you'd like to see. Does need to improve his fastball command, according to scouting reports. But at 21, he's probably going to take less time in the minor leagues and may reach the majors pretty quickly. The Athletics have been pretty good about bringing pitchers along pretty fast. But we'll see how he develops over time. But again, a guy I really like, Jamie Arnold. And, I could make a case for him being drafted over Cade Anderson pretty easily. And then between Liam Doyle and Jamie Arnold, you really have to pick about, what you're really willing to bet on, a mammoth fastball or stronger grades across the board. So anyway, those are those 2 guys. Let's talk about the last guy on the list, who's certainly not least, the Pittsburgh Pirates starting pitching prospect, Seth Hernandez, who I love. 18-year-old kid, prep player, always huge risk when you're talking about a prep pitcher. Hernandez is a guy that I've seen drafted number 1 overall. I've seen him drafted in the top 10, the back half of the top 10, or right in the middle. Very unlikely he's going to escape the top 10 in any draft in almost any format. This is a very exciting pitching prospect. 6'4", 195, great frame for a starting pitcher. Probably will put a little bit of weight on, which is what you want to see. He's 19 years old, so he's got plenty of time to pack on some weight. He's getting Hunter Green and Jackson Jobe comps in the scouting grades. He's a fastball changeup monster, but also has strong additional breaking pitches. So he's got 4 true pitches. Curveball, slider goes along with the fastball changeup. His grades are 65 fastball with a 70 change, and then 55 for the other 2 pitches, and a 55 control grade and 65 overall for a pitcher. High risk grade, which is commensurate with his age. But a 65 grade for a starting pitcher from Baseball America with those grades is pretty exciting to see. This is a guy I like a lot. As I said, really like his frame. I could see him very justifiably being drafted in the top 3 overall. But that's the top 14 pitchers, 14 players on my board. So after covering them, let's move on to the next 6. And I've organized it this way because these are the guys that are basically in the 8s in the baseball handbook. And they are an interesting group as well because, again, you have an interesting mix of 18 or 17-year-olds versus 2 college players. And it just highlights, again, the amount of risk in this draft. If you look overall at these last 2 slides, how many of the players are either red or blue and how few of them are green being the college players. And I think, again, this is why a lot of owners are very reticent about the first round this year. A lot of risk, not a lot of certainty that the college players are perceived to bring you. But let's talk about these guys individually. Emmanuel Luna, the Cardinals' right fielding prospect, I already talked about in the J15 preview, so I won't dwell on him. Like him very much. Definitely in this range on my draft board. But let's talk about Jace. Jace is an interesting prospect as well. One of the college players on the board, 21 years old, didn't play after he was drafted. But very much like Ethan Holiday, this is a guy whose power is his carrying tool, but he has some pluses that Ethan Holiday doesn't. 6'6", 230. This is a huge guy. Huge, right? And the power frame projection is enormous on him. He has a 60 grade overall with Baseball America for his power. He could be better than that, given his frame and how he develops. Drew a ton of walks in college. Very livable contact rate so far. But interestingly, he's a very good runner. So it's a power-speed combination. He has a 60 speed grade by Baseball America, which you like to see. Really valuable asset in the points league like ABL. Would like to see him improve his barrel rate a little bit, according to the scouting reports, which will allow him to better reach his power and drive the ball more often. Has been given a 45 hit grade tool, and that's certainly better than some guys who have been drafted based on their power. But again, like Ethan Holiday, how much contact is he going to make over time for Jace to be a really justifiable top 15, top 20, prospect in the draft? I feel pretty safe taking him in this range, 15 to 20. Given the college experience, given his ability to, already drive the ball over the ballpark. Barrel rate is something that they can improve with coaching, and Cleveland's done a nice job bringing along hitters. Center fielder, a lot of premium value there from a defensive perspective. So, very strong likelihood that this kid reaches the majors and ends up being an above-average regular. So I like Jace quite a bit. Would be surprised to see him taken by some people even higher in the top 10. But let's move on to Quentin Young, another prep player, Minnesota Twins prospect, third baseman, 18 years old. Had only 17 at-bats in A-ball last year, which were pretty ugly, to be honest. But 6'6", 225, another huge kid. 6'6", 225 at 18 years old is already enormous. So there's a lot more projection on this body frame. So he could be a really monster hitter in terms of power. So this is a big risk, big, high reward kind of guy. Contact and frame, raise all kinds of outcomes. His hit tool is a 40 by Baseball America. That's a huge red flag. 60 power, 55 runs, 60 overall, extreme risk. Highlighting what I was saying about big risk, big reward. Connor Griffin last year was a guy who got a lot of criticism for his hit tool. That ended up being better than advertised, a lot better than advertised, and so his power and speed have skyrocketed him up prospect lists. Is Quentin Younger guy who can prove himself, in the minors this year and actually, make better contact. And if he does, look out. This is a guy that could climb up prospect ranks. It's also entirely possible he could be Elijah Green and be like, a forgotten guy. So huge risk, huge reward. Picking him in this range still has its risk, 15 to 20. But that power and speed combination on overall grade by Baseball America, coupled with the other factors I consider in the handbook, such as frame, age versus level and his, his position score at third base is still pretty good. Very likely to stick at third base, which is nice to see, but an exciting power hitter who I'm pretty comfortable taking in this range, notwithstanding the risks. So let's talk about the X-Man, Xavier. Yet another 18-year-old, another third baseman, this one with the Houston Astros. 18 years old, 6'4", 205, really strong frame. And unsurprisingly, again, you see the power grade go along with it. 65 power grade, 45 hit, 45 speed. This is very similar to Ethan Holiday's profile. Remember, he was a 40 speed, but had the 65 power grade, 45 hit as well. Didn't play after he was drafted. And, I raised the comparison to Ethan Holiday for one of the following reasons. Ethan Holiday is a guy that people are drafting sometimes in the top 5, certainly in the top 8 of the draft. Xavier might be a safer version of that you can get in the back half of the middle rounds of the first round, the middle of the first round, I should say, and that 15 to 20 range. And that probably is more palatable for the risk. And I made a similar point last year when I did my preview about J.J. Weatherholt and Bazana being taken #1 overall, and I put their grades up on the screen, and they're very similar graded players, but you were able to get JJ much later in the top 10 than the #1 overall pick, and I think that has turned out very well for the people who waited or were able to draft JJ a little bit later. This is similar, although the players are a little bit further apart in my draft board, but I do like Xavier quite a bit. One of the things the scouting reports noted was he struggles with off-speed pitches. So certainly as he gets a little bit further along in the minor leagues, that's something you want to keep an eye out on for, because when they get to AA, a lot of the pitchers there know how to throw off-speed pitches and have command of them, not just relying on their fastballs. And how will he adapt? How will he progress? Will he plateau out and really struggle once he gets up to that level? But interesting guy, a lot of power, a lot of fun. So let's talk about Tyler Bremner. This is a guy who just got drafted really high in our ACL draft. I want to go back and look. I think he got drafted, #1 overall in our ACL draft, which was very shocking to me. But, it just goes to show you that owners have different views on things, and that's great in fantasy baseball. It's one of the things that makes it fun. But I have him in this range, 15 to 20. And let's talk about, why he's there, what's good and what's, questionable about him. 6'2", 190. Again, decent frame, not great, but decent frame for a pitcher. He's got, mid upside in terms of mid rotation upside, according to Baseball America. Again, that's why I wouldn't draft him #1 overall, but I think in this range, he's an interesting guy to consider. Fastball changeup guy. Possible he reaches the majors in 2026, which is the reason he's an exciting player in this range. Particularly in a league like ABL that is so deep and so pitching starved at the major league level, and the pitchers are so expensive in the draft. 60 fastball, 70 changeup, 50 third pitch, 60 control, 55 overall average risk. So again, this guy doesn't have the ceiling of some of the pitchers that we talked about on the prior slide. In other words, these 2 pitchers, or 4 pitchers, I should say. But a little bit safer profile, a guy who's going to be reaching the majors pretty soon, presumably. I would flag that the Angels have not exactly done a great job at developing pitchers over the years, or any prospects over the years. So that is somewhat of a red flag there. But certainly a guy worth considering, in my view, in this range. I would also add that he has like a low effort delivery, which is a plus for me. And unlike Liam Doyle, who I talked about having a high effort delivery, these low effort deliveries are a little bit easier on the body, a little bit easier on the arm. Makes me a little bit more comfortable drafting a pitcher this high. So that is something you can consider when you're considering a pitcher in this range. Let's talk about Briggs McKenzie, starting pitcher for the Atlanta Braves, organization that has done a really nice job identifying pitchers, including prep pitchers over the years. This guy falls right into that kind of classic mold for the Braves. 6'2", 190, didn't pitch after he was drafted. He's 18 years old. Again, another guy who gets projected as a mid-rotation upside by Baseball America. The one significant red flag for me on him is his fastball grade of 50, which is average. Again, I noted that I don't like to spend high draft picks on pitchers with 55 grade fastballs. This 50 grade fastball is concerning to me. I do have him graded in this range because of his other qualities. He's got, 60, 55 other pitches, 50 control overall, 50 control overall, 55 overall, height and risk. But a great organization, huge spin rates on his curveball. That's a 60 grade pitch. And what you're really relying on here, if you're going to draft him this early, is the organization bringing him along and developing him. And the Braves have done a terrific job adjusting pitch mix and pitch shape with pitchers. So this is a guy I'm still excited about, but probably have him closer to 20 than 15. They're in that range. All right, so let's talk about the next group of players. This is the back half of the first round, the 10-7s. These are guys in the handbook who would have 7 grades out of 10. And I like these players very much as well, but you can also see here, yet again, very young. Only 3 of these guys are college players. The rest are all prep players. So I think, again, a lot of the talent in the first round is very young in my view, which is another reason why owners are very skittish, I think, about drafting guys in the first round this year, and why you're seeing so much criticism of the first round in fantasy circles. But let's talk about these guys. Again, these are not in order. I just put them on the screen. I randomized it to protect the competitiveness of my draft board. Selfishly, I admit, but I have to do it. Let's talk about Josh Hammond, shortstop, Kansas City Royals. 6'1", 210, 18 years old, as I said, did not play after he was drafted. Probably projects as a third baseman. Right now he's a shortstop, but that is something to consider, that he's not going to play that position. And I mentioned that also because some of his grades aren't terrific for a third baseman. 50 hit pool, 55 power, 50 speed, 55 overall, high risk. Normally you want to see a guy with a better hit tool and a little bit more power, maybe 60 power grade at third base, in order to be competitive at that position at the major league level and be somebody who gets advanced and bought into by an organization. But he is a great athlete. He's got good bat speed. Does have some contact issues, which is commensurate with a 50 hit tool grade. Likely a solid regular. And if you're getting that value in the back half of the first round, that's fine. Just not like a super exciting player. Would much rather have, for example, one of the J15s personally at this point for me, because they have much higher upside. But if you want to play a little bit safer, this is a guy who has an attractive profile and is probably going to come along nicely and be in the majors in a few years. Let's talk about Sean Gamble, another Kansas City Royal. So they've got a couple guys in my top 30. Center fielder, 6'1", 188. Again, perfectly fine frame for an 18-year-old. Very similar to the other players we're talking about. Did not play after he was drafted. Good bat speed, but again, some contact issues. Not unusual for a prep player. But 50 hit tool, 50 power, 60 speed, 55 overall, high risk. That 50-50 grade for the hit tool and power is kind of meh for a guy at the back half of the first round. Once again, highlighting that, I really like some of the J15s up here because of their upside. But, another exciting, center fielding prospect who can run if, the Royals can bring along his hit tool or make him grow a little bit bigger into his frame. Maybe the power comes along a little bit better. But this does strike me as a player who may be a better real-world baseball player than a fantasy player, because of his defense and because of his whatever other intangible he brings to the team for the Royals. So let's talk about Gavin Feen. Gavin's another big kid, 6'3", 200, 18 years old, had very uninspiring 41 at-bats in A-ball. Notably, he's a poor fielder, and there's a lot of DH risk for him. So that's something to keep in mind. As I've talked about before, the players who end up getting slotted over to DH or first base struggle more to reach the majors because there's just so much more competition at those positions, and you really have to be able to hit in order to get to the majors. So let's talk about his hitting. 55 hit tool, 55 power, 55 overall grade, 40 speed. So he's a terrible runner. Not going to get you any stolen bases. Not very likely to get a lot of extension to runs after he gets on base. So he's going to have to really hit to reach the majors. He could do it. He's got 2 good grades. But to me, that's a lot of risk for a guy you're drafting in the first round. So I wouldn't be thrilled to have to be stuck with him in the back half of the first round. But he is on my board in this range. Let's talk about Ethan Conrad. As a guy, one of the college players here, center fielder for the Cubs. 6'3", 220, great frame, 55 hit tool, 55 power, 55 speed, 55 overall. So he's basically a double nickel across the board. Average risk. This is a player I really like in this range, right? Those grades are all above average. He's got an average risk grade. This is a guy who's got a sturdy frame. He's 20 years old. He is coming off a shoulder surgery, which is a demerit on him. But that low risk game, +4 tools, really nice value in my view, particularly given his age and his presumably relatively close to the majors status. In this range to be drafting, I'd be perfectly happy to getting him in the 21 to 30 range if I was drafting there, which I'm not this year. But for those drafting in that range, I think he's like a guy with an asterisk on him. Another guy let's talk about is Nick Becker. Yet another 18-year-old. He had 24 very lousy at-bats at A-ball last year. Obviously a very small sample size, but not anything inspiring, to say the least. 6'3", 180. Another good frame. A little slight, but he can grow into it. So good height. Weight you'd like to see come along, but he's 18 years old. That could come. He's got 55 hit tool. Like to see that. 50 power. Okay. We want to see that weight come on. See if we can get the power up to 55. 60 speed. 55 overall. We'll see. Decent middle infield prospect with some speed right now. If he grows into it, Seattle can bring him along, add some power, be more interesting to me. Let's talk about Ryan Mitchell, a guy I really like. He's a Cardinal prospect. Really like him in this part of the draft. Wouldn't draft him any higher. 6'2", 185. A little bit more weight than Nick Becker that we just talked about. But 18 years old, didn't play, strong contact skills, and very good exit velocities. 55 hit, 50 power, 55 run, 55 overall, high risk for Baseball America. Right now he projects as a solid to above average regular. And if the power comes along with some growth and maturity, it could be more than that. Also plays the premium position of shortstop, as I said. So I really like Ryan Mitchell. Let's talk about Steele Hall. The Reds prospect, 6 feet, 180. Again, he's got room to grow. Could grow into that frame even more. A little shorter than the other two prospects we just talked about, Nick and Ryan. 18 years old, didn't play after he was drafted. 45 hit tool, don't like to see that. 50 power, don't like to see that. His carrying tool is his speed. He's an 80 grade speed. Love to see that in a roto league where they count steals. Somewhat less relevant in a points league like ABL, where you do want to see him having home runs, which generate the most points. This is a guy who, if he can get on base, you can't steal first. If he can get on base, could generate a lot of fun on the base paths, stolen bases, runs scored, because he will be able to extend singles into doubles, doubles into triples, and so forth. Triples into inside the park, but runs presumably with an 80 speed. Power's very iffy, and his hit tool has been described as fringy. A guy you can take in this range, but if I had to pick, for example, I highlighted in purple on this 3 players that I think are very close in grading: Ethan Conrad, Ryan Mitchell, and Steele Hall. And I personally would lean with Ryan Mitchell or Ethan Conrad, depending on what you're looking for, college or prep player this place, over a guy like Steele Hall, notwithstanding his elite speed at 80 grade, because I just think in our scoring format in ABL points league, the other 2 guys are more likely to deliver value. There's also a risk that Steele becomes just a pinch runner, at the major league level, or a utility player. We just don't know with that hit tool and power grade, but does have electric, very fun speed. We'll see how he progresses as he comes through the minor leagues. So let's talk about the pitchers. There's Casey Witherspoon of the Boston Red Sox. This is a guy I'm very excited about. He was just drafted in the top 10 in ACL by a Red Sox fan, which I think is a little high, but I do like him very much. And let's talk about what I like about him and what some of the demerits are that maybe keep him outside of the top 10. So he's got 6'2", 206 frame. It's a good frame for pitcher. Like the weight at 200 pounds already. 20 years old. Didn't pitch after he was drafted. Baseball America projects him as a 3 overall, 3 upside. 60, 60, 55, 45. So he does have 4 pitches. 50 control, 55 overall. Average risk, would you like to see for a pitcher at this point in the draft? I think he's really nice value in this range if you can get him. Polished pitcher already, so knows how to pitch by all scouting reports. Fastball cutter, or his lead 2 pitches, has great deception as delivery. And what really stood out is he's already able to manipulate pitches and pitch shape. So this guy is already a kind of polished pitcher who's really becoming a professional, it seems. So I really like that at this range in the draft. I think it probably is one of the reasons Baseball America only gave him an average risk grade. But, you know, he does only have 50 control overall right now. You do want to see that come along a little bit. But I think he's a really exciting pitcher in this range. I could even justify drafting him, you know, in that 15 to 20 range as well. Super exciting prospect for the Red Sox, and I think he's great value at this part of the draft in the first round. Let's talk about Gage Wood, the Phillies pitching prospect. 21 years old. He barely debuted, hit a couple of espresso and A-ball. This guy has a huge relief pitcher risk because of his frame. 6 feet, 205. He's already also had a shoulder surgery, you know, illustrating yet again the risk of a pitcher of this frame. You know, he's got a lead extension. No, I'm sorry. He has the look of a closer. Excuse me. I was looking at my next guy on the list. Look of a closer. 70 fastball, 60 secondary pitch, 50, 45. So he's got 4 pitches right now. 50 control, 50 overall grade, average risk. You know, really exciting electric fastball. But at 6 feet, 205, I'd be very reticent to take him in the first round, even though I haven't graded so highly. This is not a guy I'd be looking to take it with a first-round grade. But I know, you know, some people love fastballs, and they're going to go in on this guy. I've seen him drafted very high in some leagues. I personally would pump the brakes on him, even though he's going to be relatively close to the majors. Not that there's anything wrong with getting an elite closer, but it usually takes many years for that to happen, and closers come out of the woodwork. So you don't draft a player this high to be a closer. And pitchers this short present just a ton of injury risk, and we've already seen that risk borne out with his shoulder injury. So let's talk about the last guy, who's certainly not least on the list. This is Cruz Schoolcraft, and I love this kid. And I love him because of his frame, first and foremost. 6'8", 229. This is a big kid who's only 18 years old, and presumably could put on some more weight. You know, barely debuted last year in A-ball. Huge upside and projection into his body as he matures physically. You know, a lead extension because of his frame, which creates all kinds of problems for hitters. 60 fastball. He's got 55 secondary pitches, 50 control, 55 overall. You know, high risk grade. But this is a kid at this part of the draft. If you get him, like, this is wonderful value in my view. You know, this is a kid who could really grow into his body and really pop this year, depending on how things develop. You know, in prospect ranks. You know, love him. He's with the Padres, who have done a good job at identifying pitchers, you know, in drafts, although they did a very terrible job of keeping them. They keep trading away their prospects. But a lot of major league teams are littered with, you know, former Padres prospects. So guy I'm really excited about in the first round. I think if you're drafting this range, 21 to 30, he's a lot of fun to take at this range. I've seen him go pretty high in some of the drafts that I've been involved in the season already. But that's my top 30. I do think, once again, that there's a ton of risk in this year's first-year player draft, particularly in the first round I'm talking about. And, you know, if you're not willing to tolerate that risk, if you're not willing to embrace it, it's a really good round to trade out of and get value in the second round, because I think a lot more college players are in the second round if you're feeling more comfortable taking those players. And I do think, as I mentioned earlier today in the podcast, that there's a very little separation between a lot of the prospects in the first round in terms of, like, you know, their grades, where I have them, you know, on my board. You know, I could have a guy 13 who I could justify taking 15 and vice versa. So it's not a draft I'm looking to make a lot of moves in. I'm going to kind of stand pat where I am on the draft board. and just take what falls to me. Again, I was very happy to get Luis Hernandez at 12 overall, my ACL draft. Love my J15 guys. I do have a lot of them in the top 14 this year. But I hope you found this interesting. Don't use it against me as my draft. And, until I speak to you again, remember to ABP. Always be prospecting.